coldbox is an MVC framework. MVC stands for Model View Controller. You'll see the models folder below, or on the left rather, here in VS Code. That's where your model code goes. You can think of model kind of as short for business model or data model. This is where most of your business logic will live. All of your SQL queries, any code for reading and writing to files, exporting things to CSV files, talking to APIs, web services, sending emails, and so on. That will all mostly live here in the models folder. I say mostly because while the object-oriented purists would say all the code for that business logic lives in your models folder, having built OOP applications for a number of years, I've come to feel that that's more of an ideal guideline and not always how things work out in the real world. Occasionally, you'll find small bits of business logic will creep up into your controllers or handlers as they're called in coldbox, but I digress. Mostly these exceptions have to do with data validation, and they are indeed that, exceptions, but they will happen from time to time where you'll find little bits of what I might call loose business logic in your handlers. However, the best long-term goal of your applications is to try and get all of your business logic here into your models folder. Models by default go in the models folder. Like many things in coldbox, you can override this default in the coldbox CFC config file by changing the models location setting. I typically leave it to the default, but that's just me. And the default is actually that models location line, not just set to the word models, but it's actually commented out like you can see on my screen here. This commented out section of our coldbox config file came that way when we ran the coldbox create app command earlier in this video series. So it creates the setting, but as it's using the default, and most applications tend to use the models default anyway, coldbox create app set this up and then just commented out the setting for us when we created the file. But if you want to go in and change it, here's the line where you change it. In my file, it's line 136. Change your model's location to something, uncomment that code, of course, and then be sure to restart coldbox so that that change takes effect. The handlers on our screen here are talking to the database via code in our models folder. Model CFCs are just regular CF components, like any other components in your app. You can create them with the typical create object or new syntax, like you can in any other CFML application, not just coldbox. However, your coldbox app comes with Wirebox baked in, and it's recommended that we use Wirebox to load models whenever possible. The Wirebox way to do this is to use the function getInstance. That's it. It's nothing ultra fancy or complicated. Instead of calling create object, you call getInstance, and now you're using Wirebox to get your models loaded. Boom, done, just like that. And as you can see here on lines 47 and 56, we're using getInstance instead of create object or new to get an instance of that model CFC loaded up into memory so we can use it here in our event handler. You still get back the same model CFC instance in memory by doing it this way, but doing it the Wirebox way has some other advantages. Wirebox is a dependency injection, or DI library for short. It creates the CFC you asked for, and if that CFC needs other CFCs created before it can run correctly, Wirebox will create those components automatically for you as well. Additionally, you can tell Wirebox if this is a one-time use CFC that you're going to just use for one request, or if it's a CFC you want saved in memory so other pages in your app can also use it without having to recreate the object every time. Wirebox comes pre-installed in coldbox. All you have to do is configure things a little so that it knows which features you want to use, and that's it. Let's take a look at the 3 different ways you can create an object in a coldbox application. First, we've got the traditional create object component, and I just pass it the path to where the CFC is that I want to invoke, call the constructor, and get back a reference to that object. And these are just objects in our models folder. Here's the message of CFC in question. You can see it's got a couple of property tags at the top, a small constructor doing a little bit of work, and then it's got methods for create, read, update, and delete. So it does your basic CRUD statements, and it is actually working. Go over here and reload my page. You can see there is the output in our browser. Now let's comment out that version of the code, and we can also use the new syntax. For those of you that are not aware of this, new was added to CFML a couple of versions ago. I can say create object component and then call the constructor, which takes this much typing to do, or I can say new path to the component I want, put a set of parentheses after it, and that will do the same as create object and call the constructor for us all in about half as much code. And you can see when I reload that in my browser, it works the exact same way here. Now, let's look at the third version. This is get instance. This is the version of the code you can use that's baked into coldbox and wirebox. Get instance does all of this for you as well. Go get the object, call the constructor, create an instance of it, and pass it back for us. Now here's where we're going to see the difference in what this does versus what the first two options do. Save that code. Let's reload it. And you can see the output is exactly the same. Now I'm going to go back here to my code. I'm going to comment this out, and we're going to use one of the earlier versions, and I'm going to add a write dump statement here to take a look at what the output of that object is. And then I'll just turn off that view and abort that so that it stays right here and we can see what the contents of this object is. So here we're just using the new syntax. So no wirebox, coldbox stuff, just standard CFML to get that object. Load it up and you can see we get an instance of our messages object. It's got all of our properties in it, or our functions rather, create, read, update, delete. It's got our init constructor in it and nothing else. Let's go back here to the handler. I'm going to comment out the new syntax, replace it with get instance, and let's save and reload that. We still get an instance of our messages model component, and it's got our create, read, update, delete in it. But look at these other methods that got added in here too. Expose mixin, get property mixin, get variables mixin, include mixin. Several new pieces of functionality were added into that component. This is the wirebox decorated stuff that gets slapped on the outside of our component when it's created for us using this get instance syntax. Those functions won't do anything if you don't want them to. They'll stay out of your way. They just let coldbox and wirebox do the wirebox functionality when you get to the part of your application where you want to start invoking some wirebox features. You get those features embedded into your CFCs automatically just by calling get instance instead of using one of the older syntaxes. And really, get instance takes less typing than either one of these do as well. So you save a little bit of keystrokes when you do it the coldbox way, in addition to getting all the benefits of doing it the coldbox way. As I mentioned earlier, the easiest way to start using wirebox is to just start calling get instance instead of create object. Now when you call create object, or when you say new and some component name, you have to specify either the absolute or relative path to where that CFC lives, as we can see in the commented out code on our screen here. With wirebox, you just say the name of the CFC. No path info was given in our example. So how does it know where to find that messages CFC, for example? Well, the messages CFC in question is part of our model. Therefore, it lives in the models folder by default in our application. Over here on the left, you can see I've got the models folder expanded out. There's our messages CFC next to the users one we created before. And you can just say get instance and pass in the name of any CFC in that folder. Wirebox will go there and load it up for you. Okay, so what if we have other folders that we want wirebox to be aware of as well and load files from those places too? Well, you can customize how wirebox works by going into the wirebox CFC binder and changing the settings in there. Up here in our config folder, you'll see there's our wirebox CFC binder file. There's a setting in here called scan locations that you can see on the screen. It's an array of folders. You just add paths in there for where you want wirebox to search, reload coldbox, and you're done. Right now it's empty, which means it's using the default settings, which is just to check the models folder in our application. If I wanted it to check some other path on our file system as well, I would just put that path here in the scan locations array, save it, reload coldbox, and coldbox would then check both my models folder and whatever other folders I specify in my scan locations option. In this example, we're starting with using wirebox to load our model CFCs for us. And we've got a pretty small app so far. Only 2 CFCs in that models folder we just looked at. And they're not very complicated either. You and I both know that's not very realistic. And in the real world, you may have an app with dozens or hundreds of database tables and just as many CFCs that talk to them all. Plus, those tables probably join together a lot, and the CFCs that model them and their related functionality will also grow in complexity as that happens. It can get tangled really, really quickly, keeping track of what goes where, which CFCs do which things, and so on. For that reason, it's really recommended that before writing any code, we take a step back and design out how the business logic CFCs of our application will be built, which data will live inside which objects, how they will connect together, and when will these items need to be created. You can try writing code as the first step, but odds are you'll design yourself into a corner and end up with some headaches in the code, especially as the app grows in size. To prevent this from happening, it's recommended that we start not with writing code, but instead by doing some data modeling. UML diagrams are a great way to literally draw out what the classes in your app will do. There are a variety of UML and data modeling tools available. Each has different features and price points. There's definitely something available to meet your needs. Some tools will even take the UML you design and can scaffold out the code for you afterward automatically, so definitely check around for UML design tool before writing too much code. It may seem like a waste of time, but trust me, you'll end up wasting more time if you write the wrong code before things have been spec'd out correctly. And when you're done with that, writing the CFCs, you can use Wirebox to load up any CFCs, whether it's a service, a model, a DAO, or whatever else you end up needing to build to have the correct design in your application. Here on the screen are several UML resources available for you. Spark System is a enterprise level application for doing UML modeling. They have several different options available within that suite of prices, or within that suite of products rather. There are free options, pay options, subscription options. You can find something for whatever feature set and price point you're looking for, not just from these links here on the screen, but using whatever your favorite search engine is. I'm sure you can find lots of other UML tools. Just pick the one that is most comfortable for you, and please start with that before building a giant application from scratch. Earlier we mentioned that Wirebox can load up CFCs, and that it can either recreate that CFC every time it's called, or that it can load a CFC once and just reuse that component over and over as the application is running. The CFCs that get recreated every time they're needed are called transient objects. This is basically what happens every time you call create object and put the data into a variables scoped variable. Since the variables scope goes away at the end of the template's execution, the next time that CFC is used, it will be rerun by that create object call, and thus it will rebuild that component again and again. The CFCs that get created once and are reused are called singletons. You get a single instance of it for the entire application to share. This is what happens when you put something in the application scope in your app. There's only one application scope for your entire app, so it doesn't matter what file I'm in when I say cfset application.companyname equals some value. Now any CFML code that runs on our app will have the variable application.companyname available to it. And no matter where in our app that variable is changed, the entire application will get that update because they're all sharing the same single copy of that data. Here we're taking a look at our messages CFC, and this is one of the models in our application. Without coldbox, if you wanted to make a singleton, you'd pretty much have to stuff that object into your application scope, which means you'd probably be creating them in the onApplicationStart handler in your app, which means they're all getting created when the app starts up, which means lots of startup time when the app first loads. With coldbox, if you want to mark a CFC as a singleton, you simply add the word singleton at the top of the CFC file, like you can see here. Then you reload coldbox and you're done. Now, when you call getInstance anywhere in your application, the first time that you call it on that object, coldbox will load it, or rather Wirebox will load it, and anywhere else in the application that getInstance is used on that same CFC, it will just reuse the copy that's already in memory rather than calling create object again and again, saving you some overhead and thus making your application run a little bit faster. That's how you make your singletons. In the old way, doing a legacy application style development, you'd stuff it into your application scope. Using Wirebox, you simply add the singleton keyword to the top of your component. Save and reload, and you're done. If you want to make transient objects, you just do what you've always been doing, call getInstance, but don't add the singleton notation at the top of that CFC. You might be asking, what if I have an object and sometimes I want it to be a transient and sometimes I want it to be a singleton? How do I do that? Honestly, that's probably a sign you've got a flaw in the design of your application somewhere. And I'd recommend you go back to the part in this video where we mentioned doing the UML data modeling first to make sure the app is architected correctly and you don't design yourself into a corner. We'll be using Wirebox and these various notations in several of the upcoming videos, so you'll get lots of experience using them throughout this video series.